Hello, welcome back to the Prevention is the New Cure podcast. We're here discussing all things NHS and health related with a political twist. I am Steve Brine, Member of Parliament for Winchester in Hampshire. I'm the chair of the Health and Social Care Select Committee in the House of Commons, and I'm joined by...
I'm Helen Stokes-Lampard. I'm a frontline general practitioner in the Midlands, Lichfield to be precise. I'm chair of the Academy of Medical Royal Colleges, and I'm also the founding chair of an organisation called the National Academy for Social Prescribing. Great to be here.
Fantastic. Yeah, nice to see you again. Okay, so belated happy Easter. This is, believe it or not, this is episode 4 of our little podcast. Last time we did public satisfaction with the NHS, didn't we? We talked about that.
Yes,
and
it wasn't great.
Wasn't great. We talked about nitrous oxide, commonly known as laughing gas, and all the harms of alcohol. And then we talked a bit about Easter eggs and pets. So yeah. I can confirm that Monty, the Labrador, who is sitting here under my desk as we're recording, did not so far help himself to any of the children's Easter eggs.
Excellent. That does imply there are still Easter eggs remaining around your house?
Strangely, there is actually. Yes. In fact, this is a classic, isn't it? 15-year-old daughter said to me yesterday, Dad, next Easter, yes, would it be possible if I chose an item of clothing instead of an Easter egg?
Growing up so fast.
I know. Anyway, look, if you like the podcast, please click like on your platform of choice, because apparently that helps us. We have news today, Helen, I see. Breaking news. Harry is coming to the coronation. But not Meghan. Now, why am I mentioning Harry?
I know exactly why. Has your brother-in-law given you a hard time?
No, he doesn't know about it yet. But the reason I'm saying this, listeners, is because last time I had a dream about Harry and Meghan, it was the dream where Harry and Meghan are somebody else you know, while being somebody else you know while being Harry and Meghan. And that someone else was my brother-in-law and his wife, who had this strange dream where we were sort of hanging out with Harry and Meghan, but it was brother-in-law and wife. Anyway, since I mentioned this, you would be amazed, Helen. People have said to me, I've had that dream too. Now, I don't know whether this is because Harry and Meghan are, obviously very well-known public figures and they're everywhere, or certainly have been in recent months, but other people have had this dream too. So, I'm just putting it out there that, maybe I'm not so odd.
I'm not commenting on whether you're odd or not, Steve. I do know that vivid dreams are really common. I get some extremely vivid ones, but I have to say royalty don't usually feature in them. But I'm not sure I necessarily want to share my dreams with everyone.
No, probably best. Well, you are a dame, so I would have thought royalty could feature in your dreams. And I'm sort of punching above my station, really, aren't I, in doing that? Anyway, without further ado,
moving on.
Yes, where are we going to start this week?
Sadly, I think we've got to start again with industrial action by junior doctors, because as we're recording this, we are right in the middle of 4 days of full walkout strike by junior doctors in England. This does not affect the devolved nations currently. Lots of people had been doing lots of things to try and get this averted, but sadly, the industrial action has gone ahead. It's the second block of industrial action that they've taken. And there is huge effort going on by people to cover for them, but people are spread very thin. And clearly, consultant colleagues in hospitals and GPs in community are stepping up and covering all the work that our more junior colleagues do. But I think it's so easy to forget the vital role that junior doctors play. I mean, the name junior doctor is such a misnomer. I mean, they are the absolute backbone of service delivery throughout the NHS. And they are in a pretty bad place in terms of how they're feeling at the moment. But for everyone else who's covering for them, people have given up holidays to be there. I think it's pretty stressful, and we've heard some difficult news today about covering some of the hospitals, but I don't know what you're hearing.
Well, actually directly from constituents as a constituency MP. So, I mean, look, I think there's two truths here. One is that the pay slide that they're talking about is real. Even if there's disagreement over to what extent, and the BMA are using one measure of inflation, which I think is the CPI, not the RPI. And, I think the ONS have sort of disputed the extent to which the pay slide has happened. But there's no question there's been a pay slide since 2008, really, from the financial crash through to the inflation spike post-war, during war in Russia, Ukraine. So that's one truth. Second truth is that a 35% pay rise is unreasonable. In the court of reasonableness, I don't think that one chimes. So I think the Secretary of State is dead right when he says that. I think, and I was at Department of Health as Jeremy Hunt's PPS, Parliamentary Private Secretary, during the first junior doctor strike in 2016. I mean, actually, we're very early on in this dispute, and as such, I think both sides are sort of sparring, sort of sizing each other up, trying out their lines. And it was the same in the nurses dispute, wasn't it, with the Agenda for Change group, is that it was very, very confrontational and wordy at the start. The problem is, of course, in this early bit of the dispute where they're trading blows, it's the patients, isn't it? It's my constituents that are caught in the middle. I had an email yesterday from my local trust, and I suspect all MPs are getting this from their local trust, talking about the number of cancelled appointments and cancelled procedures that are happening as a result of this. And, they are clocking up. They're clocking up into the tens of thousands. And that, of course, is just going to make all of the pressures worse. So the other thing I'm hearing just finally is I was actually out in constituency today, local elections coming up. I was talking to some constituents on some doorsteps, and I chatted to a junior doctor who said to me, that something's got to give. He said, I appreciate 35% seems a lot, but we've lost a lot. And, I don't feel any determination that means I have to stay in the NHS. I'm getting all sorts of offers and enticements to go down under, and it's attractive to me. And so I know we've got to find a resolution to this. 35%, I don't think is it, but if we don't, can we afford not to?
So loads of stuff in what you've picked up. Let me just throw back a couple of things at you, Steve. So first of all, there's a really good graph in the Financial Times today. Not that I read the Financial Times diligently, I hasten to add, but a really good one comparing how salaries have risen or fallen from the sort of the median for a range of professions. And it does show very clearly that the doctors have actually dropped a lot. I mean, this includes the whole breadth. And we know junior doctors have done worst out of doctors. So going back to your first point, doesn't matter what measure you use, they've done badly, and they have been the system has served them poorly over the last decade.
Yeah.
But I think everybody agrees about the scale of the ask is somewhat eye-watering. I think the scale of the ask would be so much more palatable if there was a narrative about it being over the next X number of years. An instantaneous pay restoration of 35%, you're absolutely right. People just are shocked at that as a statistic. If there's a narrative about spreading it over a greater time, that could be a lot more palatable. So for me, it's about getting people together to talk. And what I'm not hearing at the moment is any sense of the parties coming to the table. And before you can start negotiations, you have to have a sort of preconditions. You have to set the scene, build some trust, at least be able to speak to each other and build a bit of respect between each other. And that's really lacking at the moment. So my plea is to get people talking. I think it was your phrase, it's got to be jaw, not war.
Yeah, but I don't see much hope of that right now, because I said about those early stages of the war that we seem to be in. I mean, the hope has to be the template of what happened with the nurses and the Agenda for Change, which is that, preconditions were dropped, they sat down and did the jaw, and guess what? They came up with an accommodation that, fingers crossed, the unions will support.
Well, we'll know in a couple of days.
Well, we'll know in a couple of days, yeah. What we're going to need here, because I think there's a lot of afters. There's a lot of hangover from 2016 here. There's a lot of people who are very sore still, and I understand that. And of course, that health secretary then, Jeremy Hunt, is now chancellor. So I understand that. What we need is a leap of faith. We need someone to take a leap of faith on both sides in this dispute. ACAS were involved last time. The dispute resolution body were involved last time in solving the junior doctor strike. And I think, that's what we may need this time, because you're right. If they sit down and talk about pay, clearly they're not going to land on 35%. And I suspect the BMA know that full well. But there are so many other issues as well, aren't there, as there were in the 2016 dispute, because after the pandemic and the winter we've had, this is the last thing that junior doctors need and the NHS needs. So, they've got to find a way to sit down and solve this. So it's going to be a leap of faith.
It is, because the statistics are eye-watering in terms of cancellations. You alluded to thousands and tens of thousands. It's actually hundreds of thousands of procedures that are going to be cancelled. They're estimating somewhere between 200 and 300,000 appointments and procedures cancelled over these 4-day period because of the double impact of the Easter weekend. And of course, that just adds to the backlog. Now, people will have these rescheduled, but for every person who's rescheduled, somebody else gets pushed further down the line. And we're hearing some pretty grim stories. So please, let's get people to the table, and whatever it takes to get them there, whether it's ACAS, whether it's any other independent person to help them get talking, we all want that.
Yeah. Okay. So we're just going to talk about smoking now. And obviously, I'm sure you in your surgery see all sorts of implications of lifetime smokers and tried to encourage people not to. But it's been quite a big announcement this week. So when I was a public health minister back in 2019, I published the second very big thing called the Tobacco Control Plan, which was to sort of get us to smoke free by 2030. The government have this week, so just yesterday actually, published, we're recording this on Wednesday, so yesterday on Tuesday, the 11th of April, they've published a sort of update, if you like, to that. And there's an awful lot in it. It still has that ambition of being smoke-free by 2030. We're going to be almost 1 in 5 of all smokers in England will be provided with a vape starter kit to quit
Brilliant.
the habit. So that seems interesting. So local councils be invited to take part in the scheme and then design things which suit their areas. So obviously there are more challenges with pregnant women who smoke in one area of England than there are in others. There'll be much more support for women to have smoke-free pregnancy, because of course that then hopefully reduces the number of babies born underweight or underdeveloped with health problems requiring then ongoing neonatal care, and the risk of miscarriage obviously goes up. The government are going to consult on mandatory cigarette pack inserts, so something that actually drops out of the pack when you open it, with positive messages and information to help people to quit the habit. And there's going to be a big crackdown on illicit vape sales as part of the measures to stop children and non-smokers taking up the habit. Does this sound, before we introduce our guest, does this sound to you as a GP like a good thing?
Absolutely. It sounds like a really important step forward. I mean, I'd argue there's loads more we could be doing and should be doing and should have been doing, but absolutely, I was delighted to hear the headlines a couple of days ago, and I just want to know when it's rolling out to my area in Lichfield, because there are so many people, I think, who could be helped by this.
Yeah, I think NHS figures for 2021 showed that 9% of 11 to 15-year-old children used e-cigarettes.
9%.
9%, and that was up from 6% just 3 years earlier in 2018. So you can see why there is a need to act, because smoking prevalence in England in 2021 was 13%. Now that's the lowest on record. But it's still, given that smoking is still the biggest preventable killer in our country today, it is still something that we're talking about, prevention being the new cure. Boy, this should be low-hanging fruit, but it's very hard, of course, without support to get people to quit.
I mean, vaping is a gateway to so many other addictive substances for young people, and we absolutely have to make this so much harder for young people to get addicted to vaping. We are doing them such a disservice. We're setting them up for a lifetime of problems if we carry on at this rate.
Okay, Helen, shall we delve a little deeper then into this? We've got a guest on the podcast, Deborah Arnott, who I think you know well, and I certainly know well, CEO of ASH, which stands for Action on Smoking and Health. Deborah, welcome to the Prevention is the New Cure podcast.
Hi, Deborah.
I'm delighted to be here. Great to see you, Helen.
And you too.
That's great to see you, Deborah. Now, listen, you have long campaigned on all of these issues. When I was public health minister, you used to talk to me about the tobacco control plan that I published in 2019, and I'm sure you were involved in the one before that in 2017. This plan announced yesterday by Neil O'Brien, the public health minister at the moment. How does it measure up? Are you happy, sad? Think there's more to do? Where are you on this?
Well, I think, he's the first public health minister since the Green Paper, which announced the smoke-free 2030 ambition, who's got some concrete commitments out of the government. So that's good as far as it goes. But it's just not enough. The annual investment being announced, we've totaled it up, and it's only about a quarter of the amount that the independent review the government commissioned last year from Javed Khan recommended, which was 125 million. And it's only for 2 years, no longer. So, as you say, prevention is the new cure, but we need to fund it. And at the moment, I mean, just the 125 million, I was totaling it up. It's less than 0.01% of the government's budget. And yet the Treasury is unable to find new funds. So Neil said yesterday, this isn't this is in addition to the existing public health grant, but it is coming from the total DH grant. So that's all a bit frustrating because, as you know, smoking costs the NHS billions a year. It costs social care billions a year because smokers on average need social care 10 years earlier. And the cost to the economy as a whole is far greater than that. It's about 21 billion a year, nearly double the 11 billion the government gets in tobacco taxes. So you'll know what I'm going to say next, because it's something you've called for too. We need a polluter pays levy. We need to make the tobacco manufacturers pay for the damage they do. The pharmaceutical industry has its profits capped so that money goes from drugs to the NHS every year, billions. All we're asking for is capping the tobacco industry, whose products kill smokers, so that we can raise around 700 million to pay for tobacco control and also for other public health measures to improve our population health. We need more funding for prevention, and the government is clearly not able to find it from its coffers.
Deborah, I really hear what you're saying, and I mean, like you, I felt this is fantastic, but I think there's so much more to be done, and I see it in general practice on a daily basis. I mean, the bits that stood out for me as being particularly welcome were the commitments about the evidence around vaping. I'm really concerned about the number of young people who take up vaping to sort of brand new, and then it's a gateway to addictive substances later. I don't know if Ash has any particular views about that, but it's something that really troubles me and my patient population.
Yes, and it troubles us too, and that's why we were really pleased that O'Brien made two statements. One on vaping is that we're going to crack down on underage vaping, which is a scourge, and we've got a call for evidence on what more needs to be done to make products less appealing, less attractive, less affordable for young people. Yeah. I mean, you can buy them on every street corner. They look like sweets. They're named after sweets. They've got cartoon characters, bright colours, and they can be bought for, the disposable single-use vapes, which kids mainly buy, can be bought for under £5. That's got to be addressed. So they're immediately announcing enforcement, and they're saying they want to call for evidence. Well, we've already submitted the evidence of what we want to see happen, and we think government needs to get on and take action. But at the same time, as you know, these products, a good Cochrane review, which is the gold standard for assessment of randomized controlled trials and evidence on on treatments, shows that they are the most successful quitting aid, and they're nearly twice as effective as the old nicotine patches and gums, which you'll remember from all your years of prescribing. So we definitely need to be encouraging smokers to use vapes. But at the same time, we also need to spend money on other things that at population level make a difference. So the mass media campaigns, which used to show those horrible pictures of people's arteries full of fat and, don't be the one about 1 in 2 smokers dying prematurely, every breath about COPD, which is such a horrible way to die. The funding for those, has been cut by 90%. We're not seeing any ads on TV. And for the sort of target population, the most deprived smokers, they still watch TV. They still watch the ads. We know that these ads are effective, but they're just not being funded. So, there's
so
just
Deborah,
so much
that call, the illicit vapes enforcement squad, which I think that sounds great. I'd love to see that on the back of a jacket. It is about stopping the sales of them to under 18s. You said about a call for evidence to identify opportunities to stop children vaping. Do you think that's going to look at the thing you talked about, them named after sweets and they smell? I mean, can I just make a confession here? Helen will know I make confessions on this pod.
He does this a lot.
But when I'm walking down the street and I smell a vape, it actually smells quite nice.
Oh no, because
I've got a sweet tooth, you see. So I smelled one the other day that smelled like a wham bar, and I thought, but that's the problem, isn't it? Is that they smell nice and then they seem to be all very friendly and cuddly and just like a wham bar, which is bad for your teeth, but probably not a lot else bad. Do you think that call for evidence is going to look at those sweet smelling vapes, Deborah?
It is, but my concern is more about the naming than the actual than the flavors, because the flavors are important. Nicotine is very aversive, and the flavors help with vaping. But if you remember, I mean, when we go back to the peak smoking years, when nearly 80% of men smoked, and slightly later on, 50% of women, they weren't smoking sweet smelling cigarettes. They were smoking tobacco flavor or menthol.
Yeah.
So I don't think flavors in and of themselves are necessarily disastrous, but I think the marketing and promotion and availability and cheapness, those are the things that really make a difference. And we know that most of the children who are trying vaping at the moment are just experimenting. And they tell us they're just doing it to give it a try. And we're not seeing large numbers of young people who haven't smoked taking up vaping. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't take action, because we've seen a growth over the last 2 years. And it's mainly been in use of single-use disposable vapes, which are the cheapest products, which is why I'm concerned about affordability. And we called on the Treasury to put a tax on single-use disposable vapes to make them more expensive, and discourage their use amongst adults as well as children, because these are being dropped all over the place. They're environmentally really damaging, and we should do something about it.
Steve, it sounds like we've got a whole heap of things that are doing bad
There's a lot of
things
work
for the
to do, isn't there,
environment.
here?
Yeah.
I can see, I suspect that Bob Blackman, he's very good on this, and the number of MPs in the House who are really interested in this, including me, I suspect there'll be a backbench debate on the subject to scrutinise this new plan. But, just when we've got smoking prevalence in England, I was saying to Helen earlier, is about in 2021 was 13%. I don't know whether you've got an update on that, Deborah, but I mean, that's the lowest on record. So, doubling duty on cigarettes and some of the stop smoking services that have happened. I mean, I appreciate what you say that they're not enough, and I would agree. But I mean, that we've got the lowest level of smoking in England on record. That's surely something to be celebrated, but we're nowhere near that smoke-free ambition that I wrote as the minister, and that Neil O'Brien has restated yesterday, are we?
No, we're not. And since 2021, UCL does a more regular survey of smoking behaviour, and their survey shows that smoking rates since 2021 have pretty much flatlined. They haven't been going down anymore. So we're even further off reaching the smoke-free 2030, which you want to see. And that's why we're looking forward to your prevention inquiry, which I know will be looking at this in great detail. And we think it's really important, because the point you make about cross-party support, I mean, it was the Health Select Committee that ensured we had a proper ban on smoking in public places, which included pubs and restaurants and clubs. The Health Select Committee, smoking is not an issue where there's a lot of disagreement amongst the parties. It's just that governments need to have the ambition and enthusiasm to actually realise that the public's in advance of them. We do a survey of over 10,000 people every year, and what it shows is the public want government to do more. They see a role for government in prevention. They really do, particularly on smoking, and they want to see a levy. 3/4 of people support a levy. 3/4 of people support your smoke-free ambition.
I'm with you. I take the view, and I always did in government, that I think if you are in a publicly funded health service, as we are, then you not only have a right, but I think you have a responsibility to intervene in public health in a more muscular way. And because ultimately when these health implications present, it's the public health service that has to bear the cost of it. And no one's saying that it shouldn't bear that cost. Of course, it has to do that because it's there to look after people. But yeah, I'm glad you mentioned prevention inquiry. So the Select Committee is obviously kicked that off, and we're going to be talking different work streams. So there are 10 work streams within it, and one of them is alcohol, drugs, gambling, and smoking. So those big four addictions, if you like, and we will be producing work streams within the wider umbrella of prevention, if you like, and looking at what government have announced and how effective we think it is. And I know we'll be hearing from you, Deborah, and we'll be looking at what more we think government needs to do to get us into a better place on this.
Steve, can I just ask, with the inquiry, will you be looking at the sort of return on investment for investing more in these services for all those addictions you mentioned? Because it always strikes me as low-hanging fruit in terms of bang for buck, along with sexual health services and so on. They're often Cinderella parts of our health and public, our public health and NHS service. But as a frontline clinician, that seems a no-brainer.
Yeah, 100%. I'm very keen on the economics of prevention, which is what you're talking about, which is, the money spent up front in smoking cessation services is absolutely nothing compared to what you spend on treating somebody who presents with, COPD or lung cancer, God forbid. So, yeah, 100%. We definitely are interested in hearing from people. And if anyone's listening to this podcast who can input on the economics of prevention, then we're really, really open to that.
Excellent.
Deborah, thank you so much for joining us. It's great. Ash doing good work, and we're really grateful for you being our second guest on the podcast. Please spread the word, and thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Deborah. Lovely to see you again.
Welcome back. Okay, it was great, wasn't it, to have Deborah on talking about smoking? She really knows her stuff on that.
She's great.
Really valued. Anyway, I'm just going to press this button. That can only mean one thing. Pod surgery is now open. And one of the things that we heard from this week from one of people listeners is Hep C Trust. Obviously, hepatitis C is a very important charity. And there's been quite a bit in the news this week about infected blood. Now, for those who don't know, it's been described as sort of the biggest scandal in NHS history. So we're talking about the infection of up to 30,000 people with contaminated blood products. Biggest treatment disaster in NHS history. Thousands of people have subsequently died. A public inquiry has been taking evidence since Theresa May set it up in 2019 from people affected by the scandal, and it keeps producing various interim reports. Basically, what happened was, as I understand it, the UK was struggling at the time to keep up with demand for factor VIII blood clotting treatments. So supplies were then imported from the US, and those supplies had been collected from, among other people, prisoners. And so people with haemophilia and other bleeding disorders here were given blood infected with HIV and hepatitis viruses during the 70s and the 80s. And obviously, as I said, sadly, a number of them have about 3,000 people have passed away. And I have constituents that have been in touch with me about this. You will, I'm sure, Helen, have met patients who've been affected by this. It was just a terrible, terrible thing, wasn't it?
It was truly awful because, of course, it was done in complete innocence. I mean, the healthcare professionals involved didn't know these bloodborne viruses even existed at the time. And then when people started getting sick, there was complete bewilderment as to what was going on for a while. Of course, as we know, HIV only came to prominence, I think it was about 1980. It was identified as an illness, and it was about 1982 before we really started to understand what we were dealing with. So, yeah, there are terrible long-term consequences of something that was done with the best of intentions. And, of course, there are people from back then who were involved in accidents, or had blood transfusions after traumatic birth. So obviously the biggest single group are those with the bleeding disorders, people with haemophilia, for example. But there are a big cluster of others that I've bumped into along the way. And yeah, we're living with this. I mean, what worries me actually, Steve, is there are a huge chunk of people out there who don't know that they may still be living with hepatitis and have done for decades, and it may suddenly cause serious problems. So I think there is something here. If you know that you had a blood transfusion in the 70s or 80s and you've never been tested for hepatitis, it is definitely worth getting checked because it's a very simple blood test request.
Yeah. Well, the reason we're talking about this today on the pod is that the Infected Blood Inquiry, as I said, it was publishing interim reports, and it published an interim report just last week, actually, on the 5th of April. Okay. So Sir Brian Langstaff, who is chairing the inquiry, the recommendations interim report, I think primarily is that he wants to see the immediate implementation of a full compensation scheme for those affected by infected blood. And the reason why that matters now is because, very, very sadly, we're losing people. And so, we need to get that scheme up and running before the inquiry makes its final report. And he asked for interim compensation payment of £100,000 to be extended to bereaved parents, to children's siblings, obviously, unless a claim has already been made against the estate. So if you actually, anyone interested in this, Google's Infected Blood Inquiry, you will see it's a very good website that full of all the work that they are doing. It's an independent statutory public inquiry, and you can see all of the information on there. You can see all of the evidence that people have given. There's ways to get confidential support and listen to the public hearings, and we really do need to press. I think it's Jonathan Quinn is the minister at the Cabinet Office. He's the Paymaster General. Yeah, he's a good man actually. And there is Diana Johnson, who chairs the Home Affairs Select Committee, but also leads the all-party group on this subject. Is always raising this in Parliament, and credit to Diana. And she gets us other Select Committee chairs to weigh in behind her, and I'm very happy to do so. But as a clinician, Helen, what can you say to people on this when they come in?
I mean, first of all, I could just say on the compensation bit, I'm not a politician, I'm a doctor. And from the patient's point of view, this is a no-brainer to pay out the compensation and fast. There's no question what happened. It's very easy to prove what happened and how people got infected. Let's get some money out to them now while they can still use it in a meaningful way. And in terms of what you say to people, I've met people who are incredibly dignified about it all, actually, who have accepted that their lives were saved by blood and blood products back then, and it was not done with malice or any sort of bad intent. It was done with the knowledge that was best known at the time. But it shows our fallibility as healthcare professionals, indeed all of us in society, that what is today's fact and knowledge may be tomorrow's old news and proven to be not the same truth that we thought it was. And certainly in medicine and science, things are evolving all the time. I think all of us need to be humble enough to accept when things have gone wrong in the past, to apologise for past mistakes and to do our best to rectify them. And I think this is what the Infected Blood Inquiry is trying to do, and I commend them for the work they've done. But as is the challenge with all these inquiries, they're always slow because they have to be of necessity. But there is something that can be done here and now to help people who are suffering. And I really think this one is the one where I would urge people to step up and make the payments.
Yeah, so if you want more information on it, as I said, please Google Infected Blood Inquiry. You can also look up the Hep C Trust, who've got a huge amount of information on there and support on there, and you can find out a little bit more about them. I actually visited there's another charity called Hep See You Later, which I think is a brilliant title for a charity, who were in Winchester in my constituency a couple of weeks ago doing Hep C testing through a mobile unit that was at something called Trinity Winchester, which is a brilliant local charity, and just trying to raise awareness of Hep C and, as you say, help people who don't know they got it, and it's so important to spot that for people. Anyway, so yeah, really, really important subject. I'm really glad that we touched on it. Just one other thing before we close, Helen. So I know I mentioned before my father passed away from pancreatic cancer, but he actually had Parkinson's, and
did he?
He did, and it was really difficult for him. He's a very active person, played golf and still did play golf, and it's quite interesting actually. I've seen with golf and sport, I remember when I was the minister, how people with Parkinson's and quite a severe tremor and shake would hold a golf club and not do so.
Absolutely.
Which I think that's absolutely fascinating. There's got to be something to that. But the reason I raise Parkinson's is that there's something in the news today that a new device that's being trialled at Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge that could potentially improve the mobility of people with Parkinson's disease, being trialled on inpatients at a Cambridge hospital, something called the UE1, they need to work on that title. Worn on the sternum of the chest, delivers vibration and pulses intended to improve motor skills and alleviate stiffness. It's hoped the device being trialled at Addenbrooke's will also reduce falls. And gosh, I remember my father, having falls and trips, that then just really hit their confidence and really hit their dignity, and obviously can injure them as well. But just a word from you, from a clinician's point of view, you must see patients with Parks.
It's so I've got a dear family friend, somebody I've known since I was a kiddie, who has got very advanced aggressive Parkinson's at the moment, and she's been involved in lots of research trials over the years. She's had implanted devices in her brain which have helped for long periods of time, and there are drugs out there which are helping. But Parkinson's is a really destructive condition. If there's anything that can help people, I'm certainly up for it being tried, but I do want to see things done in proper research trials. And so what's good about this device, this is a device that people are already purchasing and having a go with, but what we haven't got is good research evidence about it. So it's great to see Addenbrooke's, a fantastic academic institution, doing a proper trial to see if this is really helpful or if it's just works for some, doesn't work for others. And for me, Parkinson's is one of a huge range of disorders that are neurology colleagues are looking after. And we had a serious shortage of neurologists out there, massive waiting lists. And I mean, to be honest with you, Parkinson's is one of those conditions that as a GP, I frequently have to say to patients when I examine them, actually, I think it's quite likely you've got Parkinson's. I'm not supposed to make the diagnosis, but I can certainly prepare the ground, because it's going to take them 6, 8, possibly 12 months to see a neurologist and get a diagnosis. It's kinder to get the ball rolling. But the other condition, of course, we see far more frequently, in which we can do something about, given that we're supposed to be talking about prevention, is Alzheimer's disease and dementias. And neurological condition, but whereas with Parkinson's, we don't know why people get Parkinson's disease. With Alzheimer's type dementia particularly, there are several things that people can do to reduce their chances of it. Whilst huge amounts of dementia disorder just happens with age and time, there are things that you can do to look after yourself, which will reduce your chances in time, because it's a cardiovascular linked disease. So, all the stuff we've been talking about already, stopping smoking, keeping your alcohol cut down, healthy diet, regular exercise, all that stuff can really help reduce the chances of dementia.
I see. Yeah. So Parks is, very much a management condition at the moment. Yeah. And, I remember my father saying, that an hour or two out on taking his Parks drugs could have a major impact on how he would be for the next 24, 48 hours or more. But just to end on a positive on this, I spotted this in the news today, as obviously the US president is here. And there's a Democrat congresswoman in Virginia, Jennifer Wexton. She's only 54 and she's got Parkinson's, and she said that she's going to carry on serving you for many years to come. Good. And so it's worth saying, isn't it, that yes, obviously in a very advanced stages, Parkinson's can really debilitate quality of life, and worse, sadly. But many people live and work with Parkinson's and manage that condition well through increasingly good drugs, and maybe this new device at Addenbrooke's. So there is great treatments out there for people suffering with Parks.
Absolutely, bring it on. And I'm delighted by her attitude. I mean, she's absolutely right. This is a condition that many people live with for decades, and we just need to do everything we can to support them to live the most fulfilling lives.
Good for her. Okay, well, look, we covered a lot of ground today, haven't we? Just a bit of an advert for future pods. So, we on the Select Committee are obviously looking at this big prevention inquiry. I talked about smoking, drugs, alcohol and gambling with Deborah earlier. It's one of the work streams that the Select Committee is going to be doing, but there are quite a lot of others. And, so it goes from healthy places to, where we live and work, and how that impacts on our health, on vaccination, which we're going to be talking about next week, actually, in the Select Committee. Health inequalities, mental health and well-being, which will include stuff about sleep, healthy eating and obesity, sexual health, early years and childhood, and cancer prevention, and then some of the other big major conditions. So if any of those things float your boat and you listen to this podcast and you want to chuck a question into the pod surgery, or you want to suggest a topic within those work streams that you'd like us to discuss on the podcast, then please find us on social media and message us that way, or you can email podcast@stevebrine.com, and we'd love to hear from you.
Been great chatting again, Steve.
It's been great chatting. Okay, yep. God bless. Thanks. Till next time. Goodbye.